on that. That's why I said it was a roadblock. Everything was in a holding pattern until they got from the federal government, it's fine to proceed with the NIA. And so they've done so now, and everything is full speed ahead. We are hopeful for December determination, because what they're doing the proposal to the board, which meets in December, and they're doing the selection of the driller at the same time. Normally they would be sequential, but here they're doing them in parallel to save time, since we would have wasted so much time waiting on this letter. So the letter is now gone, and I'm grateful for that, and we can now move forward as aggressively as we can with this geothermal project. So there has been some good movement, and I'm hopeful that I can come back with something substantial and tangible to report in the weeks ahead. You asked about young Kelvin Williams, and I really have no update. The police have not been able to shed any light on this. They have not come and indicated anything new in relation to this young man who has disappeared, as you say, since April, and so I can't add anything further, but that we have no further updates on that matter. Any other questions for me?
Good morning, Premier Brantley.
Good morning.
And may I take the opportunity to congratulate you on your recent receipt of a doctorate of laws, honorary doctorate of laws.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right. First of all, you mentioned that some time ago that there was a committee that was established to look into the issues in relation to St. Kitts and Nevis, the fair share component matters. Could you just give us an update as to where that has gone?
I didn't say it was established. I said it was being established.
Okay.
So we have nominated our members to that committee. I've written to the Prime Minister indicating who the people from Nevis would be, 3 persons. It will be led from the cabinet of the NIA by the Honorable Troy Liebert, and we have the legal advisor, Madam Helen Lewis, and Mr. Colin Doe, our permanent secretary to the Ministry of Finance. Those will be the troika from Nevis, and they now will join those from the Prime Minister's side in St. Kitts to sit and have this discussion. So that was one of the matters that he and I discussed yesterday, and we look forward to that committee being formally constituted to engage in those discussions. So at this point, that is where we are. We have not yet started the work. We're just putting the committee together.
Okay, good. All right. Budget time is approaching for the 2023 budget. Could you simply kind of identify for us what would be the perhaps 2 or 3 priorities for Nevis that you want to focus on in that budget? Secondly, in regards to tourism, which remains a significant driver for the island, what will be your focus in tourism specifically? And are you satisfied with the current level of accommodation capacity of the island? Because you're talking about an airport expansion project, for example, and people always argue about the chicken and the egg situation, but it seems to me that both of them must go hand in hand. So what is the situation and what are the plans? And secondly, thirdly, simply comment also in relation to the roads projects that are to be completed, the main road, I think, between Cliff Dwellers area into the camps areas or somewhere around there. Just give us an update on those. Thank you.
All right. Let me start, Mr. Bard, where you ended on the main road project. I really, really had hoped that I would be making an announcement today about the start of that project. Unfortunately, we have been held up a bit because our financing, they're telling us that we will have a final position tomorrow, Friday. And so I wasn't able to get that information, a decision in time for this press conference, which had already been scheduled for today. So we are optimistic that once that financing is released, that the contractor, we have selected Surrey Paving, who did the phase from Cotton Ground to Cliff Dwellers, to now do the phase from Cliff Dwellers over to ex-Petrol, I think, that area, just past Nisbet Plantation. And so that is our hope that we can get that done. They have indicated that they're ready to mobilize as quickly as the money can flow. And so we anticipate that we will have that within a coming week or so, if we can get that decision tomorrow from our bankers. And so we expect that that is going to be done. And we hope, especially the section between Cliff Dwellers and the water taxi facility, that area would be a priority, because there's some drainage issues there. But also we anticipate, based on the reports that we're getting from the tourism stakeholders, that we will have a very high occupancy for the season upcoming, based on advanced bookings. So barring storms or difficulty, we're anticipating quite a robust season. And if that is the case, we know that corridor is going to have a lot of activity. So we are hopeful that we can get that done. Incidentally, while you didn't ask me this question, as I mentioned the water taxi pier, we hope that the actual construction work will commence in the coming week. We've done the demolition of the area for the reception and departure lounge, and we're hopeful that the actual construction now will commence in a week. They're telling us that the construction period should be about 14 weeks. So we're anticipating that by December we ought to be complete. That is the hope at this stage. Tourism, number of rooms. You asked, am I satisfied with the room stock? The short answer is no. We would like to see more hotel rooms available, more villas as well available. I have had good news from the Mount Nevis Hotel, which, as you know, was shuttered during COVID, that they plan to reopen. I believe the date they gave me was the 3rd of December, that they plan to reopen that hotel. So that's good news, that will put some rooms back into the pool of hotel rooms. But you use the language of chicken and egg, and it's a really difficult analysis sometimes, because when some argue we need more hotels and we need more hotel rooms, we get the response sometimes that the occupancy of the existing hotels is quite low at some points. In fact, I think Four Seasons, our flagship, was at 5% about a week ago. 5% is practically empty. It's difficult to run a plant the size of the Four Seasons with 5% occupancy. So we have this periods of plenty and periods of famine. You know, that is how our tourism works. And so I mentioned, for example, the cruise ships. They start coming in November. By April, that's it for the year. Similarly, the tourists come, the harsher the winter in America and Europe, that's when they come. Once summer, spring and summer emerges in those destinations, they stop coming. And so you constantly have this struggle. So what is the right mix and what is the right answer? That's a matter, I suppose, the experts will continue to debate. But it is always a challenge when you say you want more rooms, increase the room stock, but you're not seeing a corresponding increase in occupancy and occupancy levels. So do we have another 5, 6 hotels and all of them are at 10%? Or do we focus on filling the rooms that we have and ensuring that the hotels that we have are operating at 80 and 90% capacity for longer periods during the year? So that is really the debate. The airport project is a major project, because one of the big complaints that we get from our hoteliers is that there's not enough airlift. Even into RLB, they complain there's not enough airlift, particularly when they have big groups. There's a huge problem in getting their people here. Nevis and St. Kitts are very expensive to get to. We can blame the airlines, because I think that they do take advantage of the virtual monopoly that American Airlines, for example, has on that pathway from the United States to our country. But I think we also must be realistic that we have some of the highest taxes on tickets in the region as well. And in fact, I heard a recent speech by this chap involved with IATA. I think IATA, they deal with the tickets and all of that worldwide. And he made the point that the Caribbean as a whole, that we were becoming uncompetitive because of the high taxes. Many of us, for example, if we buy a ticket on, say, Liat, and you see the breakdown, we realize that the amount for Liat is actually quite small, maybe 50% of the overall cost. Then you have this phenomenon where sometimes the plane lands in Antigua and then lands again in Barbados, and all of those landings are designed for those countries to collect something. So all of that is into the ticket. And we're amazed how each $25 and $50 adds up until that ticket price, which perhaps should have been $200, becomes $400. So there is an appeal, and I join in making that appeal, for us to do better in relation to the taxes that we levy on air travel, particularly regional travel, so that we can make it more affordable. It, to my mind, is unconscionable, the amount you have to pay. And I know that there are many of our residents here, and now nationals, some of them from Guyana, for example, originally from Guyana. I mean, one of them came to me the other to go to Guyana from here. He said it was over $7,000. $7,000. If you imagine a family of 3 or 4 trying to go to Georgetown for whatever, it becomes unmanageable, unaffordable. And that is really difficult, because you can actually go to the United States or go even to England and places in Europe sometimes at a far cheaper cost than you can go to visit your friends and relatives in the region. So we must do better, and I think looking at taxes and how we structure those is one way of doing better. You said the budget, what we're going to look at. Energy, renewable energy is going to be a big factor. The geothermal energy, we hope by the time we get to budget, we'll have concrete information that we can relay as to where we are. We're definitely going to be looking at some major infrastructural projects. The airport is one. The South Coast Road that we've spoken about to open up the south coast of Nevis from Long Point going towards Hanley's Road. That is another important project. We have the Pinnis Park project that I have indicated, where we want to really transform the balance of that area there. We have a port expansion project that we've been looking at, where we want to also expand the Long Point port to allow for larger ships and more cargo to come in. We think that Long Point can become an important transshipment port because of where it's located and because of the capacity that we have there for expansion. We have a lot of land in the area, and so we have been looking at that as well. Those are the projects in terms of infrastructural projects that we would want to focus on. But I think prominent among them will be renewable energy, because we feel that with renewable energy, and if we can realize the promise of geothermal, we would really have revolutionized our economy. And it is important to me and to this administration, having seen what happened to us during COVID, to find alternatives to tourism. I think that all of our eggs being in the tourism basket is not sustainable going forward, in light of what we experienced during COVID, when we came to a grinding halt. And so we have to find new ways. We have done little things in Nevis, like the movie industry that we're trying, emphasizing food security and agriculture, but we think renewable energy could be transformative. The experts are telling us that if this geothermal project can come to fruition, that there are also ancillary industries that can develop. They're talking about things like ammonia, developing fertilizers, for example. I don't want to misstate, but they're talking about a particular hydrogen that they say is in demand now that can also be created. So there are a number of add-ons that we can get from this industry, including, of course, energy that is demonstrably cheaper by several factors than what we are currently paying. So I think once you can get energy at a particular rate, you then start to attract industry. You attract people coming because you can afford now for them to exist here. We have seen in some of the islands like Anguilla, where they've announced that they remove duties on electric cars. And I think it's a brilliant idea. But I smiled to myself, I said, because if you remove the duties on electric cars and people invest in electric cars, the electric cars, by their very name, tells you they require electricity. They need to be charged. And so what's going to be the cost of the electricity that you have to keep plugging them in, of course, overnight, as the case may be, and what will be that cost? And so you can't move in that direction unless you have, one, a reliable source of electricity, and two, an affordable source of electricity. And we think, therefore, that with geothermal, we can then start to move now to electric cars, electric scooters, and really transform the island and live up to our billion of Nevis naturally. That is the ambition. That is what we're seeking to achieve. Any other questions for me?
Good morning. Devon Cornelius, Win FM. Just two questions. What are the partnerships in place for the NIA to be included in the upcoming National Carnival? And the second question is, what are the interim measures agreed on by the Attorney General and the the legal advisor for the NIA to resolve the NIA status issue. And this is concerning the judgment by Chief Justice Pereira in the Court of Appeal in the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. Thank you.
Okay, you asked about Carnival. I'm not aware that there's anything in place. I think, as usual, the NIA isn't involved with Carnival. We're involved with Culturama. Carnival is put on, of course, at the national level. And I think, Mr. Cornelius, that what is going to happen is that revelers and participants from Nevis are going to involve themselves as they normally do and go over to enjoy themselves as they normally do. And we always encourage, of course, Nevisians to go and support, as we encourage Kititians to come and support Culturama. So I anticipate that is what's going to happen in relation to that. In relation to the case that you referred to, it has attracted a lot of attention. And that case was really an issue where, if I can take a few minutes just to explain, that there were some lands over at Herbert's Beach area, and those lands were privately owned. There was adjoining lands owned by this company. I can't remember the name of the company now, but owned by a company. And that company had a hotel development that they claimed they were going to do. They had not delivered on that hotel development over all these years. They entered into some arrangement purportedly to purchase these additional lands at Herbert's Beach from a private owner. As a government, we were concerned that if all of Herbert's Beach went into private hands, that an important beach and an important area of recreation for the people of St. James and the people of Nevis more generally would be lost. And so under the leadership of the Honorable Alexis Jeffers as Minister of Lands, we moved to acquire those lands compulsorily. And we have finished that acquisition. We are now in the process of seeking to finalize payment for those lands. The result of that was that the owners of the adjoining lands who had this development plan sued the government, sued the NIA, claiming that somehow we had interfered in their ability to execute on their hotel development. This is my understanding of the dispute. The papers in that suit were served on a member of the secretarial staff or the support staff at the legal department here in Charlestown. And those documents were referred, I gather, to Mr. Terence Byron, who was the outside counsel who was retained to deal with this particular matter. There were some issues in terms of communication, I think some issues in terms of finalizing the retainer. The upshot of that was that an acknowledgement of service, which is a requirement procedurally, was not filed within the stipulated time. And so the company that sued went and asked the court for a default judgment. That is a judgment that is not based on the merits, but rather one based on the fact that no acknowledgement of service had been filed within the required time. The court granted the default judgment, and the NIA then moved to have the default judgment set aside. On that application, I gather, the master refused to set aside the default judgment. The NIA argued in part that service on a member of the support staff, secretary, at the legal department does not constitute sufficient service to bring the case to the attention of the NIA. It's like you just hand it to a member of staff there, that's not enough. And that I understand was the argument. The master refused to set aside the judgment, and so we appealed to the Court of Appeal. Apparently in the Court of Appeal, the Chief Justice of her own volition asked for counsel to address her on the issue of whether the NIA has any standing to sue or be sued in civil matters. And that would have come as a surprise, because the NIA, since before Noah built the ark, has had standing and has sued and been sued, has entered into contracts and has done all the necessary things. And so the Chief Justice invited, and the counsel involved in the case, whom I am told were Terence Byron, Dr. Henry Brown, Queen's Counsel, the Attorney General's chambers, I believe, was represented by the Solicitor General, Mrs. Simone Bullen, I think her name is, and all of the council, and I can confirm this because I decided to read the papers myself, all of them came to the conclusion that the NIA did in fact have capacity to sue and be sued. So those were the submissions before the court. The Chief Justice disagreed with all of the submissions and came to her own conclusion that the NIA did not have the capacity to sue and be sued, and that the only way that the NIA can sue or be sued is through the Attorney General. And she used the Crown Proceedings Act as the basis for so determining. The voice of the court is final until appealed or until legislative changes are made. And so that is the decision. The other two judges agreed because it was a decision of the full court. So you did say it was a decision of the Chief Justice. She's the one who wrote the decision, but the other two judges concurred. And so we have this really anomaly because that decision not only overruled decades of practice, but it also overruled many decisions that had been made by the court before, because there was never ever an issue of the NIA being able to sue or be sued. And it is a decision which is curious because the Constitution gives the NIA certain discrete powers. In fact, our Constitution gives the NIA exclusive responsibility on the island of Nevis in relation to some areas. So let us take roads, sake of argument. It would seem to me strange that the NIA constitutionally has exclusive responsibility for roads on Nevis, but we can't enter into a contract with Surrey Paving to build a road. I mean, that to my mind seems odd. And I believe that perhaps not enough attention was paid to the Constitution, and the Crown Proceedings Act was elevated above the Constitution, which really it should be the other way around. As the Constitution is very clear that it is a supreme law and that any law inconsistent with it is void. And so if there was an interpretation to be had, it ought to have been an interpretation which would have upheld the fact that the Constitution gives the NIA awesome responsibility and powers. So it seems now that we have an anomalous situation where the NIA has all its power, all its authority, exclusive responsibility in the island of Nevis, but can't sue or be sued. So if the NIA were to enter into a contract tomorrow, they say, the only way you can sue is to beg the Attorney General to bring it for you. And if he says no, what happens? So that, to my mind, is a very dangerous decision because it really means that the NIA is rendered impotent in relation to developmental matters that are within the constitutional purview of the NIA. Because at any point you can get an Attorney General in Sinkis who's hostile to the NIA. We understand the politics. And when that happens, what does that mean? So somebody wants to sue the NIA, they have to sue the Attorney General. The NIA wants to sue, the NIA has to beg the Attorney General, can you please bring the suit for us? That makes no sense whatsoever. As I said, it goes completely. So this decision is a cheese that stands alone because it goes against practice, it goes against precedent, it goes against decades of what was considered the established position, it goes against all the opinions of all the lawyers in the case. And it wasn't necessary for the decision in this particular matter. Because really the only issue was whether service on a junior member of staff at the legal department was sufficient service. That really, as I understand it, was the main issue. The Chief Justices who introduced this question asked them to advise on the question and then went against the advice that she got, which is her prerogative, and which, of course, is a matter for the court. So we have to respect the court. We have to respect the decision. And so I have sought to give you some background. Now, the obvious solution is through some legislative amendment. The Crown Proceedings Act, I believe, can be amended to make it clear that it excludes the NIA, which has, of course, the right to sue and be sued. In the interim, the Attorney General has agreed to grant a fiat to the NIA, which will allow the NIA to use that fiat. Fiat simply means permission to sue. And so that is the immediate solution to that problem. But we are cognizant of it, and we understand that it cannot be allowed to stand. I have already instructed the legal department to make arrangements to appeal this decision, which we think is bad in law, to the Privy Council, which is our final court of appeal. And we have engaged with the Honorable Attorney General to amend and put legislation in the National Assembly to fix this problem. Whichever comes first is the way we will go, but we need to have this problem resolved, because it is a problem not just for this administration. I mean, I recognize that some have sought to make a little politics out of it, but really, this is not a political issue, because whoever occupies the NIA is going to have the same problem, that a court has said that you can't sue or be sued. And if you can't sue or be sued, people are naturally going to say, well, we can't enter into dealings with you. Why would I come to Nevis and invest if something goes wrong? I can't sue the government. How could the government give me concessions and give me approvals and give me all of that if something goes wrong? I can't sue them and say enforce what it is. So it really makes a nonsense of the powers of the NIA. And I do believe that the decision is an unfortunate decision, one which was unnecessary, but it is what it is, and we must respect the decisions of the court until such time as they either set aside or legislation is used to fill the position. But in the interim, we are going the route of a fiat if it becomes necessary. I'm hopeful that the NIA isn't doing anything wrong, so nobody needs to sue us for a while, so we'll have an opportunity to resolve this legislatively. But in the interim, if it were to happen, that is the course of action that we've decided to take. I think that I've answered your questions. Okay. Second answer a little long-winded. Forgive me, but I need to give a little background. Any other questions?
Good morning, all. Bjorn Hanley representing BHC Media. Dr. Brantley, last election you campaigned on fair share for Nevis. Today, you gave some points to highlight the fact that the relationship between St. Kitts and Nevis is so far excellent. Question is, do you anticipate that Nevis will now receive a fair share of the federal resources? Question 2. On my way here this morning, I noticed that Public Works is currently patching the road from Gingerland to Charlestown. However, from Hosfords to Rams, the road was recently resurfaced and it's looking brand new. Question is there any plans in place to resurface the road from Gingerland to Hosfords? Question number 3. There are 55 African countries. However, I cannot recall ever seeing any African ambassadors or resident ambassadors from Africa in St. Kitts and Nevis or visiting St. Kitts and Nevis. So my question is, are there any African ambassadors resident on St. Kitts and Nevis at this time? Last question is, just the other day I was watching online on Facebook in South Africa. You had a leader of a political party that was being sued by a group for racist remarks. But that case was covered live. It was on all the TV channels and it was on the political party Facebook page. So I was able to follow the case live from beginning to end. And it dawned on me that I have never seen that in St. Kitts and Nevis. So my question to you is it illegal for members of the media to record or take pictures inside a courtroom during a court case? Thank you.
I'm not so sure what the answer to your final question is, Mr. Hanley, about whether or not it's illegal. I do know that the courtroom is controlled by the judge or the magistrate, as the case may be. So they're the ones who ordinarily will give permission or withhold permission, as the case may be. And that has been the practice. I can't speak to the legality or illegality, but I do know that mostly when you see the media in the courtroom, if they do want to take photos, they will ask permission of the judge And I have seen photos being taken in courtrooms, particularly on ceremonial occasions when people are being sworn in and that kind of thing. Young lawyers are being called to the bar, you know, when people want to have those photos. So usually it's done with the permission of the presiding officer, who is the judge or the magistrate, as the case may be. I think, however, your question potentially points to a larger issue of, as you said, being able to stay here in Nevis and see a whole proceeding. That's a live broadcast. And as you know, that is the way of the world now. Parliaments around the world, everything is being done live. We're here now, going live. And so the question might well be whether or not it's not time for our proceedings in our courts also to be live, so that you could stay home if you have an interest in a particular case, that you can stay home and listen. And in fact, I believe that the technology now exists to do it. It's only a question of perhaps adjusting the rules to make it possible. There are matters sometimes in court which are sensitive, of course. You can have matters, particularly some criminal matters, which are very sensitive, or some family matters which are very sensitive, and those perhaps would fall outside the rubric. But if you had a major constitutional matter, for example, in which people are interested, then I see no reason why that should not be available live to persons. You will recall that when we had the boundaries case, I think it was, that went to the Privy Council, that was live, and that people were listening on radio, people were watching the law lords deal with that matter. This was back in 2014 or early 15 when we had that issue. So I believe that the time might well have come. So that is something that certainly I would look forward to. Resident ambassadors from Africa, no, there are none here in St. Kitts and Nevis. What most countries do, Mr. Hanley, is that they will appoint an ambassador to the region. So, for example, the United States has appointed an ambassador to Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, who's based in Barbados. The English have done the same thing, the UK. They've appointed a high commissioner to Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, who's based in Barbados. And in my experience, the African countries tend to appoint an ambassador resident in places like Jamaica, Trinidad, or in some cases in Cuba, who's accredited to us. So it is not true to say we haven't had visiting ambassadors, because we have. When I was foreign minister, we had diplomatic week, for example, that we had celebrated, and we had ambassadors who had come from South Africa. We had individuals who had been here from other African nations, from Kenya, for example. I believe that we have had visits from persons from Ghana, and those individuals would have come. And we have, some of them are accredited to St. Kitts and Nevis, but not a resident here. Right? So that is a part of the process, just like we ourselves have ambassadors. For example, Dr. Kevin Isaac, the High Commissioner to the UK. He is resident in the UK, but he's also our ambassador to, I think, Thailand, as an example. Her Excellency Sherry Truss, who's resident in Ottawa, and who's our High Commissioner to Canada, is also, I think, our ambassador to Panama. So it's not unusual that countries with scarce resources who cannot afford to have an embassy or a high commission in every country will designate an ambassador, but that ambassador is non-resident. And so that is the situation with the African countries. The road from Gingerland to Hosfords, there is no immediate plan to do a wholesale reconstruction of that road. That road from Gingerland to Hosfords, I think, will undergo upgrades as necessary, repairs as necessary. Where the emphasis right now for us is on the main road would be from Cliff Dwellers over to the camps area. I did mention road construction, but I also forgot to say at the time that we're also proposing to do a significant road rebuild from Church Ground, coming through Church Ground and into Hamilton, because we think that that's a critical artery if there's any problem on the Island Main Road to allow traffic to flow in that direction. So I should have mentioned that, Mr. Bart, earlier. So going back to you, Mr. Hanley, there is no plan to do the road from Gingerland to Hosfords at this point. We have focused our attention on the other side of the island to get that road done, at which point we think that the Island Main Road will be in fairly good shape in terms of the next several years. We hope that we will have the use of that particular road. You asked about fair share. Well, that, of course, continues to be an issue. I mentioned Prime Minister Drew on 2 or 3 occasions during this press conference because, as I said, thus far, he has been a man of his word. Thus far, in terms of our discussions and the issues, he has responded positively. And I was particularly impressed with this particular funds that have become available through the Republic of China, Taiwan, because, as I indicated, these were not funds that were earmarked for this project or earmarked to us. These were funds that were diverted. And we have continued to engage. Mr. Barth asked the question, I believe it was Mr. Barth, about the committee that is to be put in place. And as I indicated, it is that committee that we hope, which for Nevis is headed by the Honorable Troy Leiber, that we hope will engage in those negotiations and those discussions to take us forward. But we look forward to a good working relationship with the federal government. I feel that the people of our country would have spoken eloquently on August 5th. The people of St. Kitts would have given Labour 6 out of 8 seats. The people of Nevis would have given CCM 3 out of 3 seats. It is now time to get down to work. And it behooves us to work together and to achieve all that we can for the people of St. Kitts and for the people of Nevis. And that is our disposition. And I think thus far that posture of cooperation, rather than engaging in any kind of attacks or any kind of aggression, I think is really the best approach. There's not going to be an election here again, I don't anticipate, for another 5 years. And so all of those who are involved in the politics have a lot of time to get themselves ready. But right now we're in governance mode. I think that is what the country wants. The country needs to settle down and allow St. Kitts and Nevis to realize its full potential. And that is our ambition, and that is what we're working towards. Are there any more questions for me?
Just one question. Regarding the announcement by the Prime Minister that frontline workers would be paid an honorarium, would that courtesy be extended to Nevis as well? Thank you.
You know, Mr. Cornelius, you have asked a question, and it is an important question, but one that I am not yet able to answer because I missed the opportunity yesterday to raise this with the Prime Minister. I really missed that opportunity. But it's a matter I need to raise with him because I am still trying to figure out what the parameters are of this honorarium. When he made the announcement, it was just prior, I think, to him leaving to go to the United Nations. So we didn't have a chance to speak. So if you forgive me, I'll come back to you with a response on that. But as a principle, I think, yes, those who worked hard in Nevis, who worked hard to keep us safe, should be able to access whatever is being offered. But in terms of the mechanics, who's going to benefit? And I'll tell you perhaps a little joke that once the Prime Minister made this statement, I didn't hear it myself, but the reason I knew about it is because, as we say colloquially, Tut Mun Saman Bagay started to call and said they're frontline worker. So some who did absolutely nothing during COVID say, listen, I'm a frontline worker. I'm a customs officer, or I'm a police officer, or I'm a fireman, or I'm a person who works at the hospital. I don't cut the grass at the hospital. That means I'm a frontline worker, so I need my honorarium. So, we need some parameters. We need to determine who qualifies. Now, I had thought that it would be the people on the task force and, those who really worked during that period of time. But I need some clarity before we can make an announcement. But in terms of a principle, I agree that they should benefit. Anything further for me? No? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And we hope to be back sometime soon with another monthly press conference. Thank you, members of the press, for being here faithfully and dutifully each month. And I look forward to engaging with you again. Thank you. God bless you.